Today, when you think of sub-Saharan Africa, you probably think of strife, instability, violence, colonization, both from Europe and now China to an extent, but also a place of undescribable beauty. Some of the most amazing creatures to have ever existed living on the earth. Yet we tend to think of Africa and Africans in a colonial context. And what I'm going to try to do today is talk about, as today is dead country, the Kingdom of Kongo, and talk about an indigenous power that existed in sub-Saharan Africa, and also about how colonization and the slave trade both destroyed this kingdom and is probably responsible for a lot of the devastation that Africans experience today. So this is the Kingdom of Kongo. The founding of the Kingdom of Kongo happened, in oral tradition anyway, as a strategic marriage between two houses. There was the Bantu Mpemba house, and then there was the Kingdom of Mbata. And in 1375, these two kingdoms merged together, but it wasn't quite yet the Kingdom of Kongo. But seriously, a lot of the stuff that plays out, I'm going to have to skip over a lot of just intricate politics and dynastic struggle that would make any CK2 player extremely happy. Come on, why can't I scroll down? So the first king of Kongo was the product of that strategic marriage. His name was Lukeni Lua Nimi, and he died in 1420. Nice. What's important about his life is that he conquered a mountain kingdom by the name of Mwene Kumbunga. And once he conquered this kingdom, he moved his city to that mountain. The mountain that the city was built upon was renamed to Mongo Dia Kongo, or the Mountain of Kongo. And the city founded on top of that mountain that became the new capital of this kingdom was Mbazna Kongo. Now, what it led to was an interesting yearly tradition. Because of the conquest of this kingdom, yet the family of that kingdom still survived. So every year, the kings of the Mwene Kumbunga would challenge the Congolese king to take over, and it was always this ceremonial thing. Now, what really helped the Kingdom of Kongo was the area around their capital city of Mbazna Kongo was extremely densely populated. So even when the kingdom claimed a massive area, the king himself and his mountain city had a lot of things and resources they could draw upon at any given moment. By the beginning of the 1700s, about 1 in 5 people in the Kingdom of Kongo lived around the capital. What this helped the king do is centralize authority and power within his seat. So rival nobles had a harder time challenging his authority. Then, after the first ruler died, the Kingdom of Kongo took more of its formal shape when his brother took over rulership. He expanded Kongo's territory and then took the important governorships of different regions and gave them to family members who were loyal to him. This further centralized power, and then by 1620, most of the allied states that they had made friends with or were, semi-attached states had all started to dissolve their authority and were more or less now provinces of a greater Kingdom of Kongo. And Kongo itself became a major trade hub in sub-Saharan Africa. It was the place you went if you needed textiles, if you needed copperware, if you needed ironwork, or if you needed ivory. Gotta throw pottery in there too. Then things started to take a big turn for Kongo when they encountered Europeans. This story seems to happen a lot on Step Back. Things were going all right, and then Europe. 1483, a Portuguese sailor by the name of Diogo Cao made first contact with the Kingdom of Kongo by exploring up the Congo River and meeting people who were part of the kingdom on the banks. He took several nobles from the Kingdom of Kongo, took them up to Portugal to meet with the Portuguese nobility, returned them in 1485, and basically made their first ties of agreements between the Portuguese and the Congolese. Part of this meeting and agreement involved the conversion to Christianity of their king, of the Congolese king, who went by the Christian name of João I. Despite in 1491, the Portuguese bringing a bunch of missionaries and priests to come and help convert the Congolese population, King João I didn't really stick with Christianity and returned to traditional religious practices pretty soon afterwards. When he died, though, there was a dynastic struggle between his son, Alfonso, and Alfonso's half-brother. The two went to war. Alfonso beat his brother in a battle and became Alfonso I, the king of the Congolese. Unlike his father, Alfonso was much more of a Christian and made Christianity the religion of Congo. And I mean, he really made it Christian. He supported a sort of syncretic version of the Catholic Church that allowed for traditional Congolese practices to mesh with Catholic tradition. This is why you see depictions of Black Jesus in this place, and Alfonso even went as far as to send his son to Europe to be ordained and to become the first bishop of Congo. And you see this is still very prevalent in this region of sub-Saharan Africa. In the main area where the Kingdom of Kongo existed, which is modern-day Angola, you still see a large presence of the Catholic Church. And it all traces its origin back to this. And from the 16th century onward, that's when things started to get unstable and things started to get violent and fall apart. And it all comes back to one aspect of this relationship with Portugal: slavery. Now, I'm not going to pretend that slavery didn't exist in Congo before the Portuguese arrived, but the demand for slaves and the demand for slave trading pushed Congo towards disunity, war, instability, and eventually its destruction. Originally, there was a whole lot of trading of all sorts of commodities going on, and then when the Portuguese did ask for slaves, the original slaves of the Kingdom of Kongo supplied to them were criminals and war captives. But the Portuguese were not happy to just have war captives and criminals. Their demand for slaves was insatiable. So they started turning to illegal merchants and slave traders who were not affiliated with the kingdom, who would just capture Congolese citizens and haul them across the Atlantic to serve in slavery for the Portuguese. Alfonso wrote to the King of Portugal complaining about this, but nothing ever came of it. And in 1526, Alfonso, to try and stop this plague of slavers coming to their country and capturing their citizens, he banned all of the Portuguese merchants from coming into their ports. But the Portuguese continued to do it even if it was illegal, and they kept pushing it anyway, further destabilizing the country. And this led to one of the key reasons why Congo was so unstable. The power that could be made from trading with the Portuguese for slaves gave different factions within the kingdom untold amounts of power, and every time a Congolese king died, the succession would turn into a crisis, and there would be multiple claims on the throne that would be backed up with different types of slave powers, and would eventually result in a slow burn civil war that would continue through most of Congolese history. I just looked at my list here to go through a bunch of this history, and I realized that it's a long list of king tries to stem the tide of Portuguese people going into their country and stealing their people, led by war and dynastic struggle and succession crises, until a king that supports the Portuguese is put in place and the cycle begins anew. There was a dynastic change with King Alvaro I, who westernized Congo, started to adopt Western dress, Western nobility titles. And in order to deal with some sort of threat, it's still unclear whether these were invaders or rebels, Alvaro I turned to the Portuguese for help, which they agreed to, but only under the condition that they could make a colony just to the south of the kingdom. And this would be the beginning of the Portuguese colony of Angola. And almost instantly, the king of Angola started to ignore the sovereignty of the Congolese territory and began either expanding into it or more often raiding and pillaging into it to capture, guess what? The only time when things turn around in any meaningful way, though, was when the Congolese reached out to find a new ally in order to help them in their struggle against the Portuguese. It led to a war with the Portuguese against the Dutch with Congolese allies. So for a brief time, the Dutch actually conquered what would become Angola, but this didn't last all that long, and within about 20 or 30 years, the Portuguese had pushed the Dutch out. The Congolese then tried to reach out to the Spanish, but this was also not successful. In the wake of the Dutch being pushed out of Central Africa and struggles with the Portuguese, there was a period of massive instability, a civil war in Congo that lasted for 40 years, a war that Congo would never really recover from. During this conflict, there were two major factions that fought over who had the rightful claim over the throne of Kongo, and really right up until the end, there was never one king that really had a definitive claim. And fairly often, there were two families having two independent kingdoms that both claimed the exact same territory. And of course, in all of the chaos, both kingdoms had to fund their armies somehow by taking war captives from the other side and selling them into The only time the kingdom actually came together and was unified in any meaningful way was in 1718. Manuel II became a definitive king of Kongo, but at this point it was way less centralized and a lot weaker than it had been before, with many dukes and counts in various regions being more or less independent at this point. The only real way that this constant instability and chaos could end was with the ending of the slave trade, which happened in 1839 when Portugal decided to end the slave trade within their borders, mostly at the insistence of the British. What this created was a more stable situation, although the king started to lose more and more authority as they returned to a regular commodities trade. This regular commodities trade created a bourgeois merchant class that became more powerful than the rulership of the aristocracy and the king, which made the authority of the king extremely challenged. And really, with all of the dynastic chaos that was, still simmering a little bit in the background, not a whole lot was actually changing on the ground because it became squabbles amongst kind of has-been rulers. Eventually, the Portuguese capitalized on this conflict one last time and supported the claim of someone who was from neither of the factions by the name of Pedro V, put him in charge of Congo under one condition, that he swear a treaty of vassalage to the Kingdom of Portugal. At this point, the Kingdom of Kongo was no longer an independent kingdom, it was now a vassal of Portugal. And that's the way things continued for much of the 19th century. The real beginning of the end of Kongo would happen in the 1880s with the Conference of Berlin. I'm sure many people who've studied the history of the Victorian age know that the Conference of Berlin was, oh boy, you want some next level racism. You look at this. Oftentimes you hear about the scramble for Africa, but basically the Conference of Berlin was when a bunch of European powers came together and decided which white countries would own the entirety of the African continent. Portugal tried to make a claim on most of what was the Kingdom of Kongo, but Portugal by the 1880s was also in not that powerful position, and they didn't really have much to bring to the bargaining table in order to make that claim. So this is when widespread colonization started to happen in sub-Saharan Africa. In 1914, this led to a revolt against Portuguese rule in Congo, which the Portuguese responded by destroying the title of Kingdom of Kongo. This effectively dissolved the kingdom and put Congo directly under colonial rule by the Portuguese. Now, what's the takeaway from this? What can we learn from the Kingdom of Kongo? What can we say about this indigenous kingdom that was powerful, that was not underdeveloped, as many people would think, but fell apart due to this chaos and internal fighting? And that is a very interesting theory that I've seen picked up by a lot of archaeologists and historians who study the economic past of Africa. Specifically, continuing until today, the underdevelopment of Africa is more due to the slave trade than any other factor. The constant drive to take more and more slaves caused instability in many regions, not just the Kingdom of Kongo, and resulted in them being unable to really put together any form of strong, centralized state. So if you look at African history, thinking about the 400 years of slave raiding, taking out all other factors, this is the one major thing that is the reason why Africa is suffering as much as it is. But in some regions, such as the Democratic Republic of Kongo today, Western countries, including Canadian companies and Chinese companies, are investing a lot in rebuilding extractive industries in this place in order to mine rare minerals that are needed to make all of our plasma screen TVs and cell phones. So the colonization of Africa is something that is still ongoing and extremely depressing. And though some like to deny that this is the case and that we Europeans, we pasty white folk, have a role in the sad state that a lot of the African continent is today, we have to face up that colonization, even before major colonization in Africa, affected multiple parts of the world, and that the scramble for slaves not only completely ruined the lives of those who were captured and sold into bondage on the other side of the Atlantic, but destabilized and destroyed the countries that they extracted slaves from. Colonization was bad. That's like the most apt thing I can say to end this video on. So that one was bright and cheery. Thank you all for watching. If you want to watch another video I did recently on African history, you can go and watch my video on South Africa, Brief History of South Africa. It came out 2 weeks ago. It's still pretty good. So if you want to see more of this face, ask me some questions, then you can go to twitch.tv/stepbackhistory and give me a good old follow there. And of course, this video would not be possible if it weren't for these wonderful patrons, because without them, cats don't get fed, rent doesn't get paid, and Tristan is in a much more dire position than he is now. So thank you very much, patrons. You're making this literally possible. Cheers. Now I'll see you guys next time for more Step Back.